But first, I'm gonna go somewhere quiet and have a heart attack.
I have a lot of respect for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. It came out during a time when superhero movies were a dying art, and even though another Marvel film, X-Men, came out 2 years prior, Spider-Man was the one that changed the landscape of superhero films as we know it. It set off a chain reaction of comic book films, proving that in the right hands, these movies can be enjoyed by everyone again. Whether you're an X-Men, Sin City, Watchmen, Guardians of the Galaxy, Shazam, or even a Superman Returns, you can't deny we live in a comic book renaissance, and it was all thanks to Spider-Man. This was the biggest superhero film ever when it came out, and it opened my eyes to the famous web slinger when I was a kid. And much like every other kid, if you love the movie, you gotta play the game. Now I know everyone is going to be saying that Spider-Man 2 is a much better movie-based game and one of the best of that genre, but everyone and their mother has talked about that game, and even I will in the future. But when's the last time we gave this game a fair shot? Well, let's check it out. Now, before I get to the actual game, it's absolutely mandatory that I play the tutorial. Typically, people try to skip past the tutorials, but thankfully this game gives you just the option to play them before the actual game. And even more so, the tutorial is one of my favorite parts because you get in-game help by the B-movie king, Bruce Campbell.
Yeah, I know, you want to get on with things, beat up the bad guys, do the whole superhero thing, blah blah blah. Well, everyone's got to start somewhere.
It's just your basic tutorial showing you about the web swinging and combat, but his colorful and witty commentary makes it all the more special.
Yahoo! Hey, king of the world, don't let it go to your head, okay? Hooray for you, you're swinging. But sooner or later, you're probably going to want to drop.
It's like he's helping you progress, but he's being an ass and insulting the player at the same time, as expected from the man who played Ash from Evil Dead. Considering he's a regular in almost every Sam Raimi movie, it only made sense to make the best use of him here.
So, follow your compass and height meter to the exit. Good luck. Good luck means goodbye. See, there's nothing more to see here. We're done. That's a wrap. You got it? We're over. I want you to understand, accept, move on with your life. Crying out loud, these people.
Sadly, he's only narrating this part of the game, but he left such a staple that they kept him throughout the rest of the games based on these movies. Suffice to say, you can never stop the king.
Hail to the king, baby.
As for the rest of the game, it's pretty standard when it comes to movie-based games. It stays true to the movie with a few new additions sprinkled in. Obviously, the main villain of the game is the Green Goblin, same as the movie, but they also threw in some other villains including the Vulture, Kraven, Scorpion, and Shocker, though I do have some gripes with it. For one, the controls really need some getting used to because they're pretty backwards, and by that, I mean it's bad. It's hard to explain, but sometimes if you try to turn too quickly or if you're pointing your joystick in the same position for too long, Spider-Man will turn around, and once he starts walking, the controls are reversed until you let go of the joystick. At least that's the best I can explain it, but otherwise if you can get used to the controls, you're fine. Because the controls don't give you a lot of free range to move since it feels so constricted, and that's what's worse is that if Spider-Man wants to turn around and face the opposite, you have to wait for what feels like a full second for him to do so, and then you can move. And yes, it is like the Cat in the Hat video game, and yes, you will get hurt if you're not quick enough. It's a mess, but one you can hope to get used to. Looking back at this game is interesting too, because unlike every Spider-Man game lately, when you shoot webs to swing from, your web attracts the nearest possible ledge of a building, giving you momentum and freedom to explore like you're actually Spider-Man. However, in this game, your web seemed to attach onto nothing. When I was a kid, I thought you were just swinging from the clouds, which sounds silly, but looking at this game, it doesn't seem too far-fetched. In any newer Spider-Man game, you would hold the R trigger for every web thrown, but here you can just tap the trigger and swing and elevate wherever, as if there's no real feel to being Spider-Man, but more so you're just gliding across the screen. Remember those scenes in the movie when you're following Spider-Man as he first learns to web swing and the camera is fixed upon him as if you're right there with him? Wouldn't you want that in this sort of game? Well, like I said, kid, give it 2 more years and you'll have it. But for one of the earliest 3D Spider-Man games, I can understand. But another huge gripe I have with this game is the stealth mode. Now, stealth mode is mostly optional here, but considering how unfair it can be, it makes you never want to do it. So Spider-Man can hide in the darkness away from enemies, which is determined by the shadowing on Spider-Man's face in the top left corner of the screen. But knowing where the shadows start and end make it virtually impossible. Honestly, this game has some of the worst stealth I've ever played. There's no clear indication as to where the shadows lie, which is impossible to navigate, especially when climbing on the ceiling, which is hard to see first off, as well as enemies you're trying not to be seen by on the ceiling when they're on the ground. And good luck not getting caught by them when you're in Oscorp, because once you do, a barrage of robots come out and blast you with everything they got relentlessly.
punch me, I bleed.
And that's another thing about this game you gotta watch out for. It starts out fairly challenging, but it can be done. But you just can't be casually throwing punches or kicks or else you get your ass handed to you. Instead, before you head into the area, you might want to look around some bit because you might find a new combo move somewhere, and you're gonna need it. Some games have combos that aren't mandatory to use, but instead they just sort of heighten the gameplay a bit when it gets a little tedious. However, most times these combos are mandatory because you'll be caught in a pinch with a barrage of bad guys, but you just lay them out with a new sweet combo move and you got it. However, make sure you make good use of finding the rest and get accustomed to the bullshit, because 2/3 in, there's a sudden spike in difficulty where all the problems I stated before show up. The horrible stealth, unfair combat controls, and horrible stealth. Yes, I know I said that twice, but it is truly horrible. There's even a part later in the game when you have to disable some systems on Oscorp and you had that option to be unseen by guards, but since you're in a room with no way of seeing through, because God forbid you'd have spidey sense, because even when you want to walk out of there unseen, you're 9 times out of 10 gonna get caught and have everyone come after you again. I mean, it can be done, but strap yourself in for some annoying repetition.
Hey, buckethead.
Hey, you watch your mouth, son. This is an E-rated game. Thankfully, the developers were kind enough to get Tobey Maguire and Willem Dafoe to reprise the roles here, because they do try to have as little characters from the movie as possible, but they don't have to get someone who doesn't sound anything like them to fill the roles. No. They sure as hell did that in the second game.
Pisses me off your loyalty to Spider-Man and not your best friend. I find him with my father's body and you defend him because he's your bread and butter.
He did kill my dad. Someday I'll get him for it too. Tell him that next time you see him.
I mean, they're trying, by God they're trying, but nowadays I hear some of these voices and I get thrown off guard. Like, listen to the voice of Uncle Ben's narration here.
You're feeling this power of becoming a man, and with this great power comes great responsibility.
Hi Zemnis, fancy hearing your voice here, and since I have you here, what do you think of this early 2000s full motion video that came out a year after the beautiful Final Fantasy X?
My. A hollow puppet that's managed to grow a heart.
Duly noted. Speaking of puppets, this game has some interesting ragdoll physics and glitches. For example, if you donkey kick an enemy off a ledge, they'll float in the air for a few seconds, as if they're being lifted by a fan below them. And I'm almost positive these enemies are actual ghosts, because they can't help but vanish into thin air every time they get their asses handed to them.
I'm going ghost! Tommy, cut it out!
So yeah, this game was pretty basic and bare-boned as any other movie-based game, but not horrible. If at all, just unforgiving at times, and can get pretty relentless with its out-of-whack controls. If you can manage the spike in difficulty in the last third, then this game should be beat in no shorter than 3 hours. It's moderately simple at times, and for one of the first 3D Spider-Man games, you can understand. This isn't particularly my go-to Spider-Man game, considering I always wanted to play the revolutionary Spider-Man 2 when I was a kid, but now as an adult, I just want to play the latest PS4 game. It's just hours and hours of fun. And all the little things I complained about with this game were perfected later in games like Spider-Man 2 and every other Spider-Man game to come. So sad to say, this is not really the go-to. But if you are keen on expanding your library of Spider-Man games, this isn't a horrible one to pass on. Give it a shot and see what you think.
You see those heavily shadowed areas? Whenever you're in a shadowed spot like that, you become invisible to the bad guys.